something different has to happen. Something new, something must change in the approach. And we've seen great promise and, in fact, evidence and data of the impact of community mentors, credible messengers, being engaged into the process, being empowered to work with people on probation, people in jail, people in the system, and work with system leaders and system practitioners to redefine the way we reach people.
If you live in a perfect world, how would you restructure relationship between those who have done the crime and done the time and the system in general, dealing with it from like a cycle perspective, right? So we hear that a lot of times it's their parents and then it's, you know, it's their whole family is usually tied in.
Right.
For that. So, you know, if in a perfect world, what would you do? What would you add to?
To break this cycle.
Regarding the cycle.
Right. That impacts whole families and communities. Well, in this perfect world, I think that is a point, an opportunity to recognize some of the larger societal drivers of what we experience as crime in our communities, right? In terms of poverty, in terms of racism, in terms of how resources are distributed, right? In terms of fairness and access. So those are the huge drivers that are feeding this whole equation in the first place. So part of the problem is if we reduce crime and criminality to the behavior of an individual committing an act, and we're missing the big picture of what's driving it, because we see that we look at the communities. How are they policed? How are they resourced? What does unemployment look like? What does housing look like? Health services, other types of access. All of that is part of the equation, both those issues that drive what people do to survive, and then also the way they're policed and how the system interacts. So all of that is feeding in. So in this perfect world, then I would push forward that there would be a more fair and sensible and thoughtful way of distributing resources and services and opportunities for people, first of all. But second of all, I think I'm reminded of a book called The Careless Society by John McKnight. And he talks about in that book how communities over time have continued to be robbed of their ability to care for themselves. And that we have more law enforcement or public safety apparatus than ever, yet people don't feel safer, right? You know, we have more resources that seem to be tied up. So if you look at all the resources in the law enforcement justice establishment, it's a tremendous amount of resources. In this society, in this more perfect world, those resources would not just be allocated for more justice system apparatus and in the form of jails, in the form of probation, in the form of police, but there would be a more balanced distribution of resources to the communities themselves where people live, and that would impact their abilities to thrive, and their ability, if caught up in some sort of issue that would bring them to the justice system, that those resources would be used to empower them to make other choices, to have other opportunities. And I think that the community mentor concept and practice is at the heart of that you would rely upon community mentors as the primary resource and group of individuals who could impact and surround and support people who find themselves in those situations to help them navigate in a positive, helpful direction. And so I think we would see a lot more investment in community mentors and community supports and services. And we would see a lessening of the apparatus of justice as we now know it. We would close prisons to a significant extent in terms of the magnitude of people who are locked up and locked away,
wow,
and under state supervision. and put resources more into the village, which we all seem to acknowledge it takes to raise our children and care for us. So we would resource the village in a much greater way, and therefore have a much more healthy, respectful, and viable relationship with formal justice systems and community.
That's really good. It is important to give communities what they need to be self-sustained, what they need to be like successful, and in like jails and detention centers and in prisons, it's a tough way to call that discipline or punishment, because it's not pouring in them. It's not strengthening them at all. It's separating them altogether. I remember I asked the teacher like, what's one of the worst things you can do to like punish a kid, and they say like, put them in detention. Like, why would you, like removing them
Right.
from their education
Yes.
in order to be isolated with others
That's right.
who make the same mistake. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time.
Oh, you're
you
welcome.
know,
Yeah,
and,
appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation. I think, the detention, removing kids from classrooms, sort of becomes one of those early steps and practices of removing people, and as a solution, which we know it isn't.
Right.
Right. Right. But how do we intervene and support people in their space? And when in those, what I would argue would only be rare occasions that they are, where they are removed from the community, that removal is done in a thoughtful, compassionate, and effective way that helps that individual return to the community with some tools and some ability and some support. So I think incarceration is obviously overutilized and vastly. And, certainly there's vast history around the impact of the war on drugs and its impact on the proliferation of mass incarceration. So as a culture, we need to fight and treat our national addiction to incarceration and realize once and for all, which I think credible messengers and community mentors help us do, realize that vastly larger percentages and numbers of people who run into conflict with the law can safely and effectively be served in their communities with the right supports.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.